My name's Tom Clendon, and I'm your SBR online lecturer. And today I just want to talk about a couple of pieces of terminology and make sure that we really understand the nature of OCI and OCE, because they are same, but different. They're very different. First of all, OCI. OCI stands for Other Comprehensive Income. So it's a performance statement. It's a period statement. It's telling us the other income that we recognize this year that isn't in the income statement, that isn't in the P&L. So, for example, revaluation gains and losses on PPE tend to be found in other comprehensive income. OCE, on the other hand, other components of equity, is an equity balance, is part of the equity on the statement of financial position, is a cumulative reserve. And what happens with profits that we're recognizing in the income statement? They flow into retained earnings. But the gains and losses that we're recognizing in OCI, they flow into other components of equity. So there's a big difference between OCI, period statement, gains and losses this year, and OCE, which is a collective reserve on the balance sheet, on the statement of financial position. But clearly they're linked. Clearly there's a relationship between the two. So it can be quite lazy, or it's easy to confuse the two. And I hope I've clarified a little bit of the language. Let's think very briefly about the sort of things that go into other comprehensive income, that go into OCI, because if they go into OCI, they will appear in your other components of equity. You see, back in the day, we would have a revaluation reserve or a foreign currency reserve. We don't have that anymore. We refer to OCE as a collection of reserves. So things that would go into other comprehensive income might be, as I've already mentioned, ISA 16, gains and losses on PPE, ISA 21, group exchange differences on the retranslation of overseas subsidiaries, on the net assets and the goodwill. Sometimes IFRS 9, financial instruments. So you might have a financial asset which is classified as fair value through OCI. So therefore the investment, the gain and loss on that investment will go to OCI. And pensions, ISA 19, pensions. If you've got a remeasurement gain or loss on pensions, that won't appear in the P&L, that will appear in OCI, and therefore every year will be part of the cumulative balance that is in other components of equity on the statement of financial position. Now, interestingly enough, there is also in other components of equity, because it's a dustbin, various other things that may be happening that haven't appeared in OCI. For example, if you have control-to-control transactions in group accounts, if you are looking at an 80% sub and buying 5% or selling 5%, there's a difference that arises, which is very importantly conceptually not a gain and not a loss. So it's not in either the group P&L, the group, nor is it in the group OCI, but you take that difference directly to reserves and you take it to other components of equity. And I'll give you another example of something that would appear in other components of equity, but is not directly from OCI. And that would be IFRS 2, equity settled share-based payments. So when you're granting options to your staff as a remuneration, as a bonus, although there's no cash flow, the issue of that financial instrument has a value which we measure at the grant date, and if we don't record it, the accounts are then going to be incomplete. So we charge an expense, debit the P&L, and we've created an equity instrument. The option to buy the share, subscribe to the share, is an equity instrument. So where do you credit? You credit other components of equity. Yeah, it's not shares. It's not, you can't credit share capital, so you credit other components of equity. So interesting, isn't it? Because you may be listening to this at the beginning of your studies on SVR to kind of get a feel for the language. And it's all integrated, isn't it? In talking about OCI and OCE, I've broadened out the debate and brought in a number of different accounting standards. So I hope you found it useful. This may be something you want to listen to at the beginning of your studies, but it may also be quite useful to listen to it again in your revision phase because it's so integrated. And you have to remember that with SBR, questions don't deal with things in silos. They don't just address one issue. So I feel comfortable quite rambling across the issues. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you found this useful.